There are things you can't explain to other people. You try, and they nod politely, and you can see in their eyes that they think you're overreacting. You learn to stop trying. You learn to trust the feeling anyway. My sister called me on a Wednesday evening. I was sitting on the back porch in Knoxville, finishing my second cup of coffee, watching the light go out of the sky. The phone buzzed on the armrest, and I saw her name, and I picked up the way I always do, expecting nothing unusual, expecting the same 15-minute conversation we'd been having every couple of weeks for the past 3 years. Updates about my mother, plans for the holidays. Small talk that filled the space where a real relationship used to be. She said my mother was tired. She said the last few visits had worn her out, that the doctor recommended she have more rest, more quiet. She said it would be better if I didn't come until the following Sunday, that they were planning a proper family dinner and it would give my mother something to look forward to. I said okay. I said that made sense. I wrote Sunday on the notepad. I keep by the kitchen phone like it's still 1,987. I didn't sleep that night. I want to be clear about something. My mother is 84 years old. She grew up in a small town in eastern Tennessee, the daughter of a coal miner, one of 6 children who all somehow made it to adulthood. She raised my sister and me mostly alone after my father started drinking, and then raised us entirely alone after he left. She worked the register at a hardware store for 21 years. She never complained about anything in her life, not once, not in a way she meant for you to hear. She is not the kind of woman who gets tired from visits. She lives for visits. She used to drive 4 hours each way to watch my nephew's Little League games in the August heat and sit there in a lawn chair with a paper fan, cheering louder than anyone. That woman does not need to rest from seeing her son. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself that people change at 84, that the body slows down, that my sister was just being protective. My sister, who had taken my mother in after my father died 3 years ago, who had given up the spare room and rearranged her life, and who I had thanked more times than I could count. My sister, who had every reason to know my mother's needs better than I did, living 2 hours away. I told myself all of that on Wednesday night and Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon. By Thursday evening, I was already packing a bag. I didn't call ahead. I told myself it was because I didn't want my mother to fuss, to worry about having enough food in the house or whether the guest room was made up. That was part of it. The other part I didn't examine too closely. I just got in the truck and drove north on I-40 as the sun went down and the radio played songs I didn't hear and the feeling in my chest got quieter the faster I moved, like I was driving towards something that would make it stop. I got to my sister's street around 9:30 at night. The neighborhood is one of those developments that went up in the 90s. Brick front houses with 2-car garages and little maples in the front yards that have grown too big now and lift the sidewalk with their roots. My sister's house is the third one on the left. I've been coming here since she bought it 18 years ago. The lights were on, most of them. The big television in the living room was throwing blue light against the front curtains. I could hear it from the driveway when I stepped out of the truck, some kind of game show, the bright, artificial excitement of it cutting through the night air. My mother's window was dark. Her room is at the back of the house, first floor, the room that used to be my sister's home office before they cleared it out and put in a hospital bed and a dresser, and the small television my mother never watches because she says the screen is too bright. The window faces the side yard. I stood there in the driveway for a moment, looking at that dark window, and I thought, she's just sleeping. It's 9:30. She's 84. Of course she's sleeping. I went to the front door and knocked. There was a pause that lasted a little too long. Not long enough to mean no one was home, but long enough to mean someone was deciding something. Then I heard footsteps heavy, flat-footed, and the porch light came on, and the door opened, and my brother-in-law was standing there in his undershirt with a look on his face that I had never seen before. Not unfriendly, exactly. Careful, like a man who has just been caught doing something and is deciding whether or not you saw it. I said I was in the area. I said I thought I'd stop by and say hello to my mother before the drive back. He said she was asleep. I said that was fine, I'd just peek in. I said I wouldn't wake her. He said she'd had a rough day. He said the doctor had her on new medication and it was making her groggy. He said it would really be better if I came back on Sunday like my sister had suggested. I looked at him for a long moment. I had never disliked this man. We weren't close, never had been, but I had sat at his table for Christmas dinner for 15 years and watched him coach my nephew's soccer team and helped him move a refrigerator one summer and generally had no feelings about him one way or another. He was the kind of man you don't think about much. I was thinking about him now. I said I understood all of that, and I appreciated his concern, and I was going to see my mother. He stepped back. He didn't say anything else. He stepped back and I walked inside. My sister came out of the kitchen. She was wearing pajamas, her hair down, and for just a second I saw something on her face before she covered it, not surprise, not irritation at being interrupted. Something else. Something I didn't have a name for yet. She said, "What was I doing here?" She said she had just told me Wednesday not to come until Sunday. She said this was not okay. I said I wanted to see my mother. She said her husband had just explained that our mother was sleeping, that she'd had a hard day, that the medication. I walked past her down the hall. I heard her follow me. I heard her say my name. I kept walking. The door to my mother's room was closed. Not just pulled shut, there was a sliding bolt on the outside of it, the kind you'd put on a shed door or a garage. Shiny, new-looking, the screws still bright against the painted wood. I stood there looking at it for probably 3 seconds, which felt much longer. My sister said it was for my mother's safety. She said my mother had been wandering at night, getting confused. She'd almost fallen twice. She said it was doctor recommended, that they couldn't watch her every second. I slid the bolt back and opened the door. The smell hit me before anything else. Not filth, exactly not that bad, but something stale and closed. The smell of a room that hasn't had its window opened in weeks. The smell of a person who has been spending too much time in one place. The room was dark except for a thin line of light from the hallway falling across the floor. I found the lamp on the dresser and clicked it on. My mother was in the bed. She was on her back, with the blanket pulled up to her chin, and she was thinner than I had ever seen her. Not sick thin, not hospital thin, but the kind of thin that comes from not enough food, not enough movement, not enough of whatever it is that keeps a person's body remembering that it needs to take up space in the world. Her hair was flat against the pillow on one side, tangled. The last time I had seen her, 4 weeks ago, she'd had it set. She always had it set. I said her name. She opened her eyes. She looked at me, and for a moment there was nothing, the blank, confused expression of someone dragged up out of deep sleep, and then her eyes cleared and she said my name, and her voice broke on it, and she reached her hand out from under the blanket and grabbed my wrist so hard I felt the knuckles of her fingers. She said, "You came." Just that. 2 words. But the way she said them, like she had been saying them to herself in the dark, like a prayer she hadn't been sure would be answered. I sat on the edge of the bed. I put my other hand over hers. I looked at her wrist where she was gripping me, and I saw the mark there, a faint, yellowish-green bruise, the old kind, nearly healed, ringing her wrist like a bracelet. I said I was here. She said she needed to tell me something. She said she'd been waiting. She said she'd been worried I wouldn't come before. She stopped. She looked past me at the door. I turned and my sister was standing in the doorway. My brother-in-law was behind her in the hall. My sister said our mother got confused sometimes. She said she told all kinds of stories, that the medication made it worse, that the doctor had warned them about this. She said it was very sad, but it was the disease, not reality. My mother looked at my sister. Her expression didn't change. She said, "I am not confused." The 3 words were the clearest, most precise thing I'd heard in that room since I walked in. No tremor in them. No uncertainty. My sister made a small sound and said something about bedtime and early mornings. I said I needed a few minutes alone with my mother. I said to please close the door. Neither of them moved. I said it again. I said, "Please close the door." My brother-in-law put his hand on my sister's shoulder and said something low that I didn't catch, and she looked at him, and then they pulled the door almost shut. I heard them in the hallway. I heard the floor creak as they stood there. I turned back to my mother. She was watching the door. When she heard their footsteps move away, not far, but a little, she looked at me. She reached out and pointed at the nightstand. Her Bible was there, the one she's had since before I was born. The white leather one with her name stamped on the front in gold letters that have worn down to nothing, that she carried to church every Sunday of my childhood. The spine is held together with a rubber band now. I picked it up. She made a gesture, open it. I opened it. Inside the front cover, tucked into the flap of the binding, were pieces of paper. Not one or two, a small, folded stack of them, torn from an envelope, from the margins of something, from whatever she could reach. I unfolded the first one. The handwriting was my mother's, shaky, smaller than it used to be, but hers. She had written a date at the top. Then, no breakfast again, door locked at night, asked to call my son. Phone taken. I sat very still. I unfolded the next one. Another date, 3 days later, fell getting up. Nobody came for an hour. Margaret's husband took the checkbook, asked about my account, told me to sign something I didn't read. I looked up at her. I said, "How long?" She said, "Since February." It was October. I had to put the papers down on my knee for a moment. I had to look at the ceiling. I had to do the thing where you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, because if you don't, something is going to break open in your chest, and once it does, you won't be able to do what needs to be done. 8 months. She had been in this room, behind that bolt, for 8 months, and she had been writing it down on pieces of paper and hiding them in her Bible because she was 84 years old, and she knew that nobody believes an 84-year-old woman when her family says she's confused. She had been writing it down because she was counting on someone to come and read it. She looked at me. She said, "There's more." She said, "The closet." I went to the closet. It was full of her things, the coats she hadn't worn, the dresses she used to wear to church, the boxes of photographs she'd brought from her old house. On the shelf above the hanging rod there was a shoebox pushed to the back. I pulled it down. It was heavier than I expected. Inside, under a folded piece of tissue paper, there were documents. Bank statements with her name on them. Account summaries. A letter from her bank dated 3 months ago confirming the addition of a joint account holder, my brother-in-law's name. A statement showing a balance that had been, 8 months ago, over $180,000. Her savings. My father's life insurance. Everything she had put away over 60 years of careful living. The current balance was $11,000. Under the bank statements, there was a manila envelope with a notary stamp on it. Inside was a copy of a will. Her will. I had seen her will. I was the executor. She'd set it up with her lawyer in Knoxville 10 years ago. She had told me what was in it. This was not that will. This was a new document, dated 14 months ago, 5 months before she moved in with my sister, and it left everything the house that had since been sold, the accounts, everything equally divided between my sister and my brother-in-law personally. Not my sister alone. Both of them, by name. My mother had never mentioned changing her will. My mother, who called me every Sunday morning and talked about her garden and the neighbors and whether the Cardinals would have a decent season, she had never said a word about this. At the bottom of the shoebox, folded once, was a piece of notebook paper in my mother's handwriting. It said, "If something happens to me, please call Dennis Hartwell. His number is in my address book in the blue box in the kitchen at my old house. He is a lawyer and a good man. Tell him Eleanor sent you." I sat down on the floor of the closet. I sat on the floor among my mother's shoes, and I held the shoebox in my lap, and I looked at those documents for a long time. My mother's voice came from the bed. "Are you all right?" I said yes. I said I was fine. I said I was going to take care of it. She said, "I know you will." She said she'd known I'd come. I came out of the closet and I looked at her and I asked her something I had to ask. I asked her if she had signed those bank documents herself, if she had understood what she was signing. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "He sat next to me at the kitchen table. He said it was so they could help me manage things. He said it was simpler." He put his finger on the line. She stopped. She said, "I didn't know how to say no." I said, Did my sister know? She didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands on top of the blanket. She said, "She was in the kitchen." I took my phone out of my pocket. I called 911 first. I told them my mother was an elderly woman who had been physically restrained in her room and showed signs of neglect and financial abuse, and I gave them the address. The woman on the line asked me to stay on the phone. I said I needed to make one more call and I'd call back. I called my mother's doctor, her real doctor, in Knoxville, the one she'd had for 20 years. I got his answering service. I left a message that I don't fully remember now, something about needing him to contact me urgently regarding my mother's care and medication. Then I opened the bedroom door. My sister was sitting in the hallway on the little bench they keep there, the one with the cushion my mother needle-pointed 20 years ago. My brother-in-law was standing at the end of the hall near the kitchen. They both looked at me. My sister said, "Whatever she told you," I said. I called the police. The silence was complete. Not the silence of a house at night, of normal quiet. The silence of something stopping. My brother-in-law said, "That's a mistake." I looked at him. I thought about what kind of man puts a bolt on the outside of an old woman's door. I thought about what kind of man sits at a kitchen table and guides an 84-year-old woman's hand to a signature line and tells her it's simpler this way. I said, "The box is in the closet. I have photographs of all of it on my phone. You should probably think carefully about what you say next." My sister started crying. Not the kind of crying that means she was sorry, the kind that means things were not going the way she'd planned. She said I didn't understand. She said it was so hard. She said she had been doing everything for 3 years and nobody helped her and she deserved something for that. She deserved to be considered. I said, "You put a lock on her door." She said it was for safety. I said, "You took her phone." She said our mother called people at all hours. She woke the neighbors. I said, "You starved her." My sister stopped. She looked at me, and her face changed. The crying face folded away, and something colder came up underneath it. She said she didn't know what I thought I saw in there, but our mother had been examined by a doctor regularly, and everything had been done properly, and I was going to look like a fool. I said, "The doctor's name in her file is listed as a physician at a clinic 20 minutes from here." I've never heard that name. Her doctor of 20 years doesn't know anything about a medication change. I'm going to find out who that doctor is and what they were told about her condition and who recommended them. She didn't say anything. The police arrived 11 minutes later. 2 cars. The officers came to the door and I let them in, and I brought them to my mother's room, and I showed them the bolt. And I showed them the documents, and I showed them the photographs I'd taken on my phone, and I let them see my mother. My mother shook the first officer's hand. She said his name twice to make sure she had it right. She thanked him for coming. She was perfectly clear, perfectly dignified, the way she has always been in her life, this woman who grew up with nothing and made something and had it taken from her by people she cooked Thanksgiving dinner for every year of their marriage. Adult Protective Services came, then a detective, then an ambulance, not because my mother was in immediate danger, but because the paramedics wanted to check her over and she hadn't been outside in 2 months and the night air, they said, would be good for her. I sat on the front porch steps while they worked, and I called Dennis Hartwell's number. I got it from my mother's address book, which was exactly where she said it would be, in the blue box in the kitchen under a stack of envelopes, and I stood in the kitchen while my brother-in-law sat at the table with a police officer, and I found his number, and I stepped outside and called. He answered on the 4th ring. He was 67 years old, and he'd been friends with my father since law school, and he said my mother's name, and his voice went careful in a way that meant he had been half expecting this call. He said, "How bad is it?" I told him. He said, "I told Eleanor 3 years ago not to move in with them. I told her. She said she didn't want to be a burden on anyone." He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He said, "I'll be there by 8 in the morning." They arrested my brother-in-law that night. Elder financial abuse. Unlawful restraint. They took my sister in for questioning and released her. But the detective told me quietly, standing in the front yard, that the charges against her were a matter of when, not whether. I rode in the ambulance with my mother to the hospital. She sat up on the stretcher with her purse in her lap. She had asked me to get her purse from the room, her brown leather one, the one she has carried since 1987, and she looked out the small window at the street lamps passing, and I sat across from her and watched her face. At the hospital, they found she was malnourished and dehydrated. They found bruising on her wrists and upper arms, consistent with being grabbed. They found that the medication she'd been given, the one my brother-in-law had mentioned, the one that was supposedly from a doctor, was a sedative, prescribed by a physician who turned out to be a friend of my brother-in-law's, someone who had never met my mother, who had written the prescription based on a description of symptoms that my brother-in-law had apparently provided over the phone. They were keeping her quiet. They were keeping her manageable. They were waiting for her to sign whatever they put in front of her, or to stop being around at all. My mother ate chicken soup that night in the hospital bed and watched the local news and told the night nurse about her garden in Knoxville, the tomatoes, specifically. She'd had a remarkable year with the tomatoes before she moved, and she still thought about them. The nurse sat on the edge of a chair and listened and laughed in the right places and said she had always wanted to grow tomatoes, but she killed everything she touched. My mother told her, "You just have to talk to them." I sat in the chair by the window and listened to her talk and thought about all the Sundays I had called, and she had said she was fine. She had said everything was fine. And I had believed her, because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was something I didn't want to hold in my mind. She told me later, a few weeks later, when she was home with me in Knoxville, sitting in my kitchen with her coffee, she told me that she had said she was fine because she was ashamed. She said that was the strange thing, that she felt ashamed, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. She said she kept thinking people wouldn't believe her, or they'd think she'd been foolish to let it happen, or they'd look at her the way people look at the very old, with that careful patience that means they're waiting for you to finish so they can explain what you actually meant. She said, "I knew if I could just get the papers to you, you'd understand. You'd know I meant it." I thought about those small, torn pieces of paper inside the Bible. Dates and facts, no drama, no pleading. Just the record of what was happening, set down in the careful handwriting of a woman who had lived long enough to know that the truth needs a witness. She had made herself a witness. She had written it down every day, or close to every day, for 8 months, not knowing if anyone would ever read it, because it was the only thing she could do. I asked her if it had been hard, writing it down. She was quiet for a moment. She wrapped her hands around her mug the way she always does, both hands, like the warmth is something she doesn't want to lose. She said, "Some days were harder than others." She said, "Some days I couldn't remember what month it was." She stopped. She said, "That was the scariest part, not them, losing track of the days." She said the notes helped with that too, keeping count. She's been with me for 3 months now. She has the room at the end of the hall that gets the morning light, and she has a raised bed in the backyard where she started garlic in October, and she calls her friend Ruth on Tuesday mornings and they talk for an hour about nothing and everything. She looks like herself again. She looks like the woman I have known my whole life. My brother-in-law is awaiting trial on 6 counts. My sister pleaded guilty to 1 count of elder financial exploitation in a deal that I did not support but was not my decision to make. My mother did not want to talk about the sentencing. She said, "I just want to move forward." She said it without any particular emotion, just a statement of direction. Dennis Hartwell filed suit to recover the money. It is a slow process. He says they will likely recover most of it in time. My mother shrugs when I mention it. She says she has what she needs. She looks out at the backyard when she says this, at the raised bed with the winter mulch over it, at the bird feeder my son helped her hang from the fence last month. I think about that Wednesday evening a lot. The phone call. Her voice. The thing I couldn't name. I think about how close I came to waiting until Sunday. How I wrote it on the notepad and told myself it made sense and almost convinced myself to leave it alone. I know now that she was counting on me not to leave it alone. She had been counting on me for 8 months. She had been writing her name and the date on pieces of envelope paper in a locked room and putting them in her Bible, and she had been counting on me to feel something in my chest on a Wednesday night in October and get in my truck and drive. I think about other people who are waiting. Other mothers in other rooms with their Bibles and their careful handwriting and their patience worn down to something fragile and fine. Other children who told themselves it made sense to wait until Sunday. If you have any doubt, if there is anything in you that does not sit right, if you call and the voice that answers is a little too controlled, a little too prepared, don't wait until Sunday. Don't wait until you can explain it to someone. Don't wait until the feeling has a name. Go on Saturday. Go on Wednesday night. Go now. Your gut is not overreacting. It never is. It is the oldest and most honest part of you, and it has been paying attention to things your mind hasn't caught yet, and it is trying to tell you something. Listen to it. That's the story. That's why I'm here, on this channel, telling it. Because my mother asked me to. She said, tell people. She said, someone out there needs to hear it. She was right. She usually is.